Today is the 10th anniversary of experiencing persecution in graduate school. Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, battling about psychology and theology. Yes, on this date, June 25th, 2015, I received a letter from the head of the internship program at my graduate school where I was working on my master's in counseling that turned my life upside down and brought me where I am today. So, on one hand, it was an experience of opposition and oppression, but actually, it turned out being the impetus for a lot of opportunity. So, this is a story, the complete story, of what I experienced in graduate school because of my work with individuals dealing with unwanted same sex attraction. I have up here my diploma from Chestnut Hill College. I keep this locked away because I do not proudly display it. I have nothing but contempt for that school. But I figure let's bring it out for this particular video. I've told my story multiple different places, different interviews, and on my own social media, and I've actually written a journal article in the Journal of Human Sexuality about my story. You'll see a link to that in the description. The journal article is Surviving Gay Activism in Graduate School, a first-person account. And that's where I give pretty much the full story, but there was a lot of redaction. The editors did not feel comfortable putting the name of the school, even the city in which the school was in, the name of the different professors. So I felt like I was being silenced even when I was writing my journal article telling my story. Because the reality is my story happened without any real publicity. We reached a settlement privately and we had to sign a confidentiality agreement for the settlement meeting. There was no trial, did not go to court. There was no news articles published about it. No journalists reached out to me or anyone else involved as far as I know. I can't find anything about the incident when I search online except for me telling my story. And so I felt pretty gypped at the end of this whole ordeal, and that this happened to me, and I didn't get to really share my story. And so I did get to sort of share it, but it wasn't complete when I wrote my journal article. So I figured, here we are, 10th anniversary of this whole thing going down. Let's give all the details. Here's the complete story of what I experienced at Chestnut Hill College. I'm going to start with pretty much the earlier draft of my original article and throw in some other items as I go along. So you can kind of consider it as a key. If you're reading my actual journal article, use this as a key to understand different things that seem to have been redacted a bit. So let's start with this email. Quote, Andrew, the program has become aware that you are providing and advertising services directed at people, quote, leaving homosexual lifestyles, unquote, healing/recovering from homosexuality, and addressing, quote, unwanted same-sex attraction, unquote. We are very concerned about this, and we need you to discontinue your internship immediately. Please schedule a meeting with us as soon as possible to discuss this. Monday or Tuesday next week look to be possible for some of us. I have CC'd your supervisors both on-site and on campus so that they are aware that your internship work must stop immediately. Unquote. That is an email from Nicholas Wood, the Masters of Field Placement at Chestnut Hill College, Philadelphia, PA, on the fateful day of June 25th, 2015. I was just 4 weeks away from finishing my year-long internship and then graduating. I had been a student in Chestnut Hill's Graduate School of Psychology in excellent standing since January of 2012. My entire experience there was arduous and very difficult. I was going to school there in person, a good hour from my job and a good hour from my home, going to classes twice a week while working a full-time job where I had also gotten a promotion, and so I had a lot of extra responsibilities. And then also I was a youth pastor during my time there. I was volunteering at the youth group for about a year, and then 2013, I took on the new role of being the youth pastor. And that had a lot of difficulties. And I was also running a support group at my alma mater, Valley Forge Christian College, now University of Valley Forge. More on that in a bit. So there was a lot going on in my life these several years where I was a student at Chestnut Hill. So I could not wait for the end to come. I was 4 weeks away. I could taste it. And then I got this email. And I felt a drop in my stomach. And almost was in denial. I was in such shock. Like, this isn't happening. There's no way this is real. But I had to face reality. Yes. They just told me to stop my internship, throwing a huge wrench into everything. So let's get into the backstory. How did I get to this point? The field of recovery for unwanted same-sex attraction, or SSA, same-sex sexual attraction, was one that I entered through a different path than most other counselors who do this type of work. I believe that most, or at least a vast majority of therapists begin exploring this type of work after they have already been in practice for some time. Usually by encountering certain clients with this presenting concern. They've already are regular therapists, and then they have some clients with some same-sex attraction, and they're looking for help. And so they start working with the client and realize, I need some extra training. So they go to an alliance training, they read books by Nicolosi and Richard Cohen, and they start applying what they're learning. Okay, that's the story of so many of my colleagues in this field, at least the old school colleagues. Few people go into their master's degree already doing this type of work. However, for me, that's the case. By the time I entered graduate school, I had 6 years of training and lay counseling experience in this area. When I was working on my bachelor's in psychology at Valley Forge Christian College, in 2006, I was fortunate to complete my undergraduate internship at Seven Ministries in Lancaster, PA, which at the time was a member ministry of Exodus International, the umbrella organization for various Christian ministries for people looking for help with unwanted SSA. Regarding Day 7, the modalities used were Christian-focused, 12-step recovery, cognitive behavioral, insight-based, and trauma-sensitive. Now, most bachelor's level internships, people just do clerical work. I did that stuff, but I also had the privilege of being involved in the recovery groups, getting to observe them, actually helping out with some intake interviews as well. And so this was an amazing experience for me. I got to work alongside the counselors as they did a recovery group for guys who were dealing both with heterosexual sexual addiction and guys of unwanted same-sex attraction, working together all summer long. I didn't just do the required number of weeks. I went beyond that and did the internship the entire summer. It was such a powerful experience, and it ignited within me a passion to do this work even more. Now, the topic of sexual and gender identity conflicts had interested me already for some time, as demonstrated by my research projects even before this internship. When I was a student at Valley Forge, pretty much all my research projects ended up being about sexuality in some way, whether it's about studying the transgender or transsexual phenomenon long before it was a major issue like it is today, doing research papers on counseling for unwanted same-sex attraction. This was an area of focus that I had from the beginning of my college experience. I also had some personal stakes in the matter. Though I myself had never experienced same-sex attraction, I had an assortment of family and friends with SSA. Some went on to embrace a gay identity, some struggled in secret, and some openly and actively fighting to overcome it in some way. So the existence of therapies to assist people with the latter goal excited me. And in my internship, I found living examples of effective and beneficent help at work. Upon returning to campus after the internship, I co-founded a support and recovery group for men at my school dealing with past trauma, sexual addiction, and unwanted same-sex attraction. That's a whole story in and of itself, and I love to tell that story, but I'll just say that that was a powerful experience because there was no help on campus for guys. The way the school would deal with things was very arbitrary, but I wanted to leave the school in a better place than how I found it. And so first I ran a group underground with another professor. After I graduated and I was still living in the area, now working at an office job, actually working at a major counseling practice, but just in the office staff, I learned of an opportunity because there was already a support group for girls who were dealing with past trauma called Journey to Joy. They later changed it to Victory's Journey for copyright reasons. And they wanted to start up a male version of it, Journey to Joy, called Moving On. And I volunteered to lead that as an alum. I still lived in the area, and I wanted to contribute to the school improving because for so long they hadn't had any sort of support groups or recovery groups or any sort of counseling, lay or professional, on campus for students. And I figured, you know what, the underground group this professor and I are running, just it's starting to fizzle out. Like maybe there's some other students I could help out. And so I volunteered to lead that starting in 2008, the fall of 2008. And by God's design, every school year, half of the guys in that group were dealing with heterosexual porn and sexual addiction issues, and the other half dealing with unwanted same-sex attraction. And so it's like I got to do what I had experienced in that internship that I did at day 7. And I ran that group for several years, just voluntarily and pretty much in obscurity. Most people didn't know that I was the one running the group because to enter the group you had to contact the professor who was my liaison. So it wasn't like I was well known for running this group, but I ran that group for years just because I wanted to do my part to help the students at school. And we dealt with things like past trauma, like dealing with emotional regulation, dealing with shame, guilt, working through forgiveness, understanding what it means to be a man in biblical terms, and just being supportive of each other, sharing our stories, doing a lot of story work together. There was a lot of difficulties in starting up that group, but I persevered, even from opposition from the very top. The head of student life did not want me to start a group up like this. That's why we had to run it underground at first. But Journey to Joy, the group for girls dealing with pain from the past, they had sovereignty. They didn't have to keep things secret. I was told originally if I was going to start up a group, if any of the guys in the group confessed to any violations of the student code of conduct, that I would have to report them. So student life and I butted heads. But when the opportunity came to run Moving On, that had sovereignty as well. I wouldn't have to report or rat out any students. And so here I was able to create a community on campus for guys who needed help. They needed a safe place to really share about their struggles and find support, find acceptance, find encouragement and accountability. I even went back to day 7 after my internship to get additional training on how to run a group and how to start up the group there. So I was doing things under as much advisement as I could. But I was still mostly working my office job, and it was a mind-numbing job. I was in the intake department, which was basically like customer service, and having to deal with a lot of difficult situations with people on the phones. And it was mind-numbing work and exhausting. And doing that type of job can make you lose your empathy for people. But what helped keep me empathetic toward those who are struggling was running that group once a week after work. And even working with the guys one-on-one during summer breaks and Christmas breaks. That kept a passion with me alive to help people. And after several years, after graduating college and running this group, I had just felt a burning passion to finally do my master's. I had been putting it off because I thought I couldn't afford it. But I realized I can't just keep working this office job and running this group part-time. I want to do this. Running this group helping guys is what I want to do full-time. So as 2012 was approaching, I realized this is the year. I'm going to finally go into graduate school. I didn't think I could afford it, but the longer I waited, the more expensive it would get because every year they raised the cost of the credits. So I was researching and looking at a few different graduate programs, and I chose Chestnut Hill College for a few different reasons. One of my professors at Valley Forge had gone there for her PsyD, and she always spoke highly of the program. And I knew that they were coming from a psychodynamic approach, at least historically they were. And I knew that in dealing with guys with sexual issues, you need to have depth psychology as your basis. I was very much interested in Joseph Nicolosi Sr. and reparative therapy, and I knew that he was coming from a psychoanalytic or psychodynamic approach. So I wanted to have that foundation. I also chose Chestnut Hill because I wanted to do something that was in person. I didn't want to do an online program. I really love classroom discussion and speaking with the professor in person. And so Chestnut Hill College, it's in northern Philadelphia. It would have been an hour's drive from both my home and from my workplace. It would have been tight, but it was still doable and was something I could do in person. They also had a satellite campus at DeSales University, which is still about an hour from where I lived, maybe slightly closer. So sometimes I took courses at that location as well. It was even further though for my job, so I would go there when they had a class on Saturdays. So I wanted to do in person, but the real selling point was that Chestnut Hill had specialization tracks in addiction, trauma, and marriage and family. All areas related to the work I do. I knew that if I wanted to continue working with guys with sexual struggles, whether sexual abuse or trauma, sexual addiction, or unwanted same-sex attraction, I needed extra training in addiction, trauma, and marriage and family, especially trauma and addiction. And also, I figured as a self-described inclusive Catholic university, I figured they would at least be tolerant of my own religious convictions. So that is the decision-making process I went through. I've heard criticism of me in the comment section of some of my videos and other attacks out there that I chose to go to a low-quality school because I'm not a very smart clinician or smart person. And so I just did the easiest graduate program I could find. I really wasn't aware of Chestnut Hill's reputation or how rigorous their program was or how difficult the admissions process would be. Or I had no knowledge of all that. I didn't choose it for any reason like that. Those are the reasons I chose. Because of the addiction tracks, because it was supposed to be a Catholic university, and as a Christian, I figured they should at least be respectful of my views on things, and I wanted something in person. And it came recommended by a former professor. Now, as I entered the admissions process, I had to come to terms with a looming dilemma. Would I try to hide my involvement in the field of homosexual recovery or counseling for those working through unwanted same-sex attraction, so that I could quietly earn my degree and then enter the field professionally? For years, I would use my social media to advocate for counseling because I knew that we were coming under persecution in this area, that there was a lot of opposition. Even before the first therapy ban, there was opposition to the work we do. There always will be. But I would advocate, and sometimes I would be scared to do that. I have a brother who is gay identified, and I didn't want to push him away by putting this stuff out there too much, where I stood on this issue and supporting the work that I was interested in doing. But as going to graduate school came closer, I'm like, all right, am I going to hide this, both personally or academically? I really had to pray about it. And I really think about it because I knew that if I were to be open and honest about my viewpoints on sexuality, not to mention the work I was doing with guys who were leaving same-sex attraction experiences and homosexual behavior, that I was risking academic suicide, not to mention career suicide, if I were to be open about my convictions and my experiences. So as I was going through the admissions process and writing my admissions letter, I had to figure, all right, do I tell them where I did my internship? Because obviously that's going to come up. And I choose to be open about it and open about the group I ran. Now, I said that in my admissions letter, I said that I'm working with guys with a variety of sexual issues, But if you notice where I went to my internship, you readily see that this was a member ministry of Exodus. Even long after Exodus closed down in 2013, they didn't change their website at Day 7 Ministries. For a couple years, it still said that they were a member ministry of Exodus a couple years after Exodus closed down. So there's no hiding that I have experience working in an ex-gay ministry. And so ultimately, I resolved that my integrity is the one commodity I cannot spare, no matter the consequences. And as a Christian, I know that my ultimate judgment will be before God, and not a council of ideologically corrupt men, not before the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Counseling Association, the World Health Organization, etc. One day I'm going to stand before God. And these other organizations may judge me and call me all sorts of things. God knows the truth about the type of work I'm doing and where my heart is at. And I'd rather be persecuted for doing what is right than being too scared to do what's right and be honest about it. So I figured I will stand on that. I resolved that God is my judge. If I ever found myself embattled, I was confident that the truth would be on my side. The truth that I had been honest since day one. And the topic came up immediately. And then throughout my time as a student. Like I said, I mentioned where I did my internship in my admissions paperwork. And it doesn't take much to find I interned at a member ministry of Exodus International. In my admissions interview with Dr. David Borzos, the then head of the psychology department, asked me which types of clients I would not treat, to which I explained how my moral convictions would prohibit me from endorsing sinful and destructive choices, such as homosexual behavior or having an affair. Instead, I would offer help to help the client explore their options and the emotional roots of such issues. The very same question came up early in my first semester in a reflection paper for Dr. Shelley Rubin's Theories of Counseling course. So very, very early in my admissions process in my first semester, the questions came up about what type of clients do I work with? Where would be limits to the type of counseling I'll do? Now I got hit with a hard reality once classes began, and that was that Chestnut Hill is not a very Catholic university. It was a very liberal, so-called Catholic university. The overwhelming majority of my professors were neither Catholic nor Christian of some other sort. Dr. Shelley Rubin, the one who taught my Theories of Counseling class and Techniques in Counseling too, was just a old school liberal Jewish lady. I had one professor, the one who taught my psychopathology course, was a female to male transsexual who kept her original name Jody Ippolito. But since I know Jody could be a male or female name, I didn't really realize it till some of my classmates after our class went to me like, Andrew, you notice that Dr. Ippolito doesn't have an Adam's apple? And I'm like, oh, you're right. They all started figuring out that Dr. Ippolito was actually a female. And so, and that would explain why throughout the whole course, Dr. Ippolito never really was really personable. But then all of a sudden, when we got to the discussion of the paraphilias and the sexual disorders, became very interested in what we all thought about different sexual norms and mores. And it made the whole class very uncomfortable because you never really got to know us. And all of a sudden, now you want to know what we think about sex. So that helped explain some things to me when I learned that after that course ended. Among my cohort, the students were a bit mixed. But being a conservative Christian with firm traditional convictions on sexuality squarely placed me in a minority viewpoint. This became quite evident in my first semester's Theories of Counseling class, when Dr. Rubin decided to open the conversation one day by disparaging recent comments about homosexuality that Kirk Cameron had made on Piers Morgan's television show. And then she went on to attack reparative therapy. Now, I happened to have to be presenting that day on cognitive behavioral therapy, So I had to sit through her going on a rant attacking reparative therapy, and then I got up there to present, and I'm like, am I going to stay quiet this whole time? I actually know more about this than anyone else here. So before speaking, I chose to share about my knowledge of reparative therapy and do what I could to dispel the myths that are out there, which led to a very robust conversation in class. The professor was opposing me, another student was very adamantly opposing me, and I even had another student who disagreed with me, but she actually advocated for me because she's like, hey, people need to have therapy that matches their values. So if I had a client who wanted this type of therapy, I can't argue with them. I should refer them to someone like Andrew if he's going to work with clients in this area. So I really appreciated that. She was being consistent with not imposing our values. It was interesting also in that most of my cohort were people who were coming straight out of undergrad and going right to their master's, but I was someone who had for several years been running a support group for guys dealing with past trauma. And they knew that. I talked about that in my class already by that point. And so, even though I was being strongly opposed, the other students wanted to hear what I had to say. Because if they knew, all right, well, you have some experience working with people, so they wanted to hear me out. And this sort of discussion happened a few times in classroom discussions. I usually would let people share their viewpoints, and then I would speak up and share my perspective and my experience. Something I wasn't really excited to do. It took a lot of courage. I had to build up a lot of courage to do it. It wasn't something I enjoyed. I actually look at my graduate school experience as sort of like my public school experience. I was homeschooled all 12 years in grade school. But growing up as a Christian, you often hear about, hey, public school, that's your mission field. You should go there to witness and share Christ with the unbelievers. And I didn't have that opportunity being homeschooled. So going to graduate and then going to college at a Christian school, didn't really have that opportunity either, though I did a lot of ministry and outreaches from all my teen years on. But going to graduate school at a so-called Catholic university, I looked at pretty much as like my public school experience. And even one time that Jewish professor, Dr. Rubin, we have another classroom discussion about something. One of the students said, if we were talking about some sort of moral issue about a client who would do something just totally repugnant, and one of the other students said, we just have to remember that people are ultimately just animals. And I had to speak up and said, I really disagree with that, and shared my perspective that we are a mix of good and bad. We are made in God's image. We have innate dignity and ability to choose right from wrong. But we do sin and we go astray, and we can really make ourselves more depraved as we do. But that is not our core identity, that we're animals that can't help what we do. We have a choice. And when I was saying that, Dr. Rubin said, I forget exactly what she said, but she pointed out, when you talk about your faith, it really is inspiring. Here she is as like an atheist Jew, and she was taken aback and took seriously what I would say. We've had a few conflicts because of how she would oppose my work, but there was a time as well when I actually kind of spoke up in a way for her and to her in a different class that we were taking, where she did something I thought was unethical, but I came to her directly, whereas a lot of other students went and complained about her behind her back. And I approached her directly about it, about the way she was handling a role play assignment that got a little too personal. And she told me after class, she asked me to stay back, and she told me, Andrew, it's very Jewish of her, you're a real mensch. And I'd never heard the term before, but she's like, no, it means you're a real gentleman. You really have integrity. Yeah, and you could tell she was hurt because a lot of students from the class the week before, they just ratted her out and complained about her. But she appreciated that I went to her directly with my concern. And so she changed course. She took it serious. So I gained respect from some professors that actually disagreed with me. So that's a little anecdote aside of what my grad school experience was like. Now, the issue of homosexuality came up in my legal and ethicals issues class, in adolescent therapy class. So it came up a few times. So throughout my grad school experience, I would voice my story of working with guys leaving homosexuality. Also in my first year, in my Techniques of Counseling class by Dr. Claudia Garcia-Leeds, I revealed my involvement in this field. Now, she gave us as an assignment writing a journal, just a personal journal. I'm not sure exactly why she gave us this assignment, but she wanted us to write a journal, and then she would read it at the end of our semester there in the summer session. Now, during that period, my church was blessed to host a seminar by Cy Rogers, one of the early leaders of Exodus International. And he used to attend the same church in Florida as my pastor. So when I started going to True North Christian Church, it was then New Covenant Church in Trapp, PA, back in 2011, and I got to meet with the pastor and tell him about the support group I was running at Valley Forge, he got really excited. He's like, "Oh, I know Cy Rogers. We used to go to church together in Florida." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "Would you like me to bring him up and do a seminar?" I'm like, "Yeah, that'd be awesome." And so after I started grad school in 2012, he had him come up that summer and do a whole conference, like a 3-day event. And I actually flew up both Cy and Cy's wife, Karen, and he arranged for my wife and I to meet with Cy and Karen for lunch or breakfast. And that was a huge honor, getting to meet with them. And Cy also blessed me with his DVDs that I then started using in the support group I ran. And his DVDs weren't just for addressing homosexuality. His Generation XXX teaching series was just about sexual struggles in general. And in particular, there's one lesson about sexual development that I always would include after that point in my moving on class or group. So anyway, that was a major experience for me. You can hear more about that in my tribute to the late Cy Rogers. But anyway, as I talk about that experience of meeting with Cy Rogers, when I got the journal back from Dr. Garcia-Leeds on the last day of class, she had a little written note there on that page. Have you thought about how your values, re homosexuality, might play in a role in the way you counsel your clients, particularly those that are struggling with the coming out process? Unquote. Now, this is important to know because after our first semester, Dr. David Borsos stepped down or was removed. I don't know the story, but he stopped being the head of the graduate program. And he wasn't replaced with a single professor, but a team of other professors. And one of them was Dr. Garcia-Leeds. And so she knew from my first year that I have worked with people in the ex-gay ministry movement. So remember that. I'm including all these stories because when I received that email from Dr. Wood, and in the subsequent inquisition that I had to go to, they claimed ignorance about my involvement in this type of work. And yet numerous professors were made aware, and if they truly considered me a danger to the field of psychotherapy because of my convictions and practice, why did they not present their concerns earlier, at least to the point of make sure that I wasn't allowed to do my internship, for example, or that I wasn't allowed to graduate because of my views? So like I said, Dr. Borsos left after my first year, and he was replaced by a board of a few different faculty members, one of whom was Dr. Garcia-Leeds, who has right there the evidence that I was involved in this type of work. And most damning of all is a story about Dr. Nicholas Wood, who taught my group therapy course just before beginning my internship. We had one written assignment we were supposed to do that was a reflection of a guest speaker at the university, Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries. He has a ministry where he works with gang members and at-risk youth in Skid Row in Los Angeles. And so this was a really awesome speaking engagement that he did, and so we were asked to attend that speaking engagement and write a reflection paper. And so in my reflection paper, I wrote, quote, "Finally, I appreciated Boyle's comments about our call not necessarily to be successful, but to be faithful, even if we do not arrive at the outcomes people expect. This standard is particularly relevant to the population with which I work, men with sexual struggles, such as sexual addiction or unwanted same-sex attraction. When it comes to these issues, above all others, The world demands to an unreasonable degree that the only acceptable outcome of counseling be categorical change. But the members of my group understand that their purpose is to honor God and be faithful to his standards no matter the degree of change they experience. The world does not agree with this nor tolerate it. And so I can definitely relate to the hostility Boyle experienced for the first 10 years of his ministry to gang members." Unquote. And as proof that Dr. Wood actually read this paragraph, he hand-wrote, right next to it, the following, quote, "Your empathy and caring sensitivity is very apparent in your writing. Excellent work." Unquote. The irony from my position of hindsight certainly does not escape me. I still, to this day, I do not understand the about face. I never learned the reason for it. Dr. Wood and I were previously on such good terms that he was looking into helping me publish one of my papers from the group therapy class that he taught. Nevertheless, Dr. Wood and the other faculty involved in my persecution remained stalwart in their claims that they had no prior knowledge of my involvement in the field of homosexual recovery, however they want to call it. Or however we want to call it. I just like to say I do therapy for those with unwanted same-sex attraction. Okay? Homosexuality recovery does make sense to me, though. So, they can't claim that they were unaware that I was involved in this field, but suddenly, now 4 weeks away from finishing up everything, they had a major problem with it. Now, I was able to surmise the likely impetus of the email I received, which was later confirmed by Dr. Wood when we met. So, like I was saying, the internship experience was very trying. I did my internship at Dayspring Counseling, not to be confused with Seven Ministries. So I did my undergraduate internship at Seven Ministries, my graduate internship at Dayspring Counseling, which was a small private practice mostly composed of Christian therapists. I wanted to actually do an internship at a Christian counseling practice because that's the population I intend to work with. So I worked hard to try to find an internship like that. And they had never really done too many internships before. They weren't sure if they would have enough clients to give me, but they eventually agreed to let me do my internship there. And so it really was a tough internship experience. I didn't get any clients for the first few months of doing my internship there. It took a while to build up my caseload. But by the spring and then summer, I had a solid group of clients. I was really getting my hours in. And so it was such a long experience. But also, it was very trying because they assigned me to Dr. Frank Malone as my site supervisor there at Dayspring Counseling. And he's a very unique individual, to say the least. He's self-described as a neo-Freudian psychoanalyst with strong Jungian leanings. Now, I'm coming from a psychodynamic school that mostly taught like object relations, but barely taught it. They left me underwhelmed. In fact, I would agree with a lot of the criticism out there about Chestnut Hill College, that it's a low-quality school. I was fortunate that I was able to get some of the good professors on their way out, like my trauma professor, my addictions professor, my lifespan development professors. They were some of the best therapists I had there, or they were some of the best professors I had there at Chestnut Hill. Most of them were adjunct professors. And I was blessed in that when I had them, it was like their last semester teaching. So I got them right before they were done. Some of the other professors who were tenured really were not that good. Sorry to say. And I did see that they pretty much had very loose admissions policies. A lot of my classmates, I don't think they had what it took to be good therapists. And it seemed like they let almost anyone in. So, yeah. I can understand the criticism that I went to a pretty easy school. Now, I made the most of it, in that I was a top student, 3.95 GPA. I got a little bit of reduction on one class, or 3.98, because I arrived late because of the traffic too many times. But, anyway, it's supposed to be a psychodynamic school, and mixed with, like, family systems. But they weren't that rigorous. They weren't as sophisticated in their psychodynamic teaching. Now I'm doing an internship, and my internship is with a real psychoanalyst. Like, he used a couch. He was serious about psychoanalysis. Very hard to find that these days. So I was game. I was open to that. It was a unique experience, but we really butted heads in some ways. We differed when it came to theory and practice. And so, though my training was in psychodynamic therapy, I was not so quick to dismiss other approaches, and I was interested in integrating other approaches. And so that led to some theoretical conflict between Dr. Malone and me, because he was a die-hard psychoanalyst, and so he was critical of all other types of therapy. He definitely hated CBT. And so we would talk about my experiences with, and conversations with Dr. Malone in my internship class. And there were a couple other conflicts that came up. One of them was that he assigned me a client who was the child of a former client of his. And this former client of his had gone through a divorce, and he and his ex-wife would squabble a lot. And so he came to us to counsel his son, his like 7-year-old son or whatever, because the son was having some sort of difficulty, some anxiety in school, and the mom contacted us saying she didn't consent to him coming. They had joint custody, and so when there's joint custody, both parents have to consent to the child doing counseling. But the dad was also accusing the mom's new boyfriend of touching his son. And so when I heard that, I'm like, well, then we should report this to Childline. And Dr. Malone was like, oh, they're a bunch of idiots there. No, he's just saying that to get at his wife. This is just them using the child to get at each other, and they do this all the time. He knew them from previously. And so he was confident it was a bunch of garbage, a bunch of bunk. But I'm like, legally, I think I'm obligated to report this to Childline. So that was the first issue that I had with Dr. Malone. He told me, don't do that, it's stupid. If you want, eventually he's like, fine, if you want, go ahead, call them yourself. So I did. And I have no idea what the outcome was. I don't think it led to anything. He probably was right. But I talked about that in my internship class, about how he was oppositional to me reporting something to Childline because he thought it was baseless and just being used as an attack between two divorcees. So there was that. Then there were some conflicts that we had because, and it was kind of funny to me mostly, but it was also a bit aggravating. As a psychoanalyst, to him, the ideal therapy session would be where the therapist doesn't say a word the entire session. The client sits on the couch, and the client just free associates the whole time, and the therapist says nothing. So what he would do is I would record certain clients. I would record as many sessions as I could. And when we would do our consultation time, I would play him a recording of one of my sessions. And he would calculate all of my verbal units. Now, what's a verbal unit? Anytime I say anything, no matter how long, if I just went, that's a verbal unit. If I said, huh, or oh, that's a verbal unit. Or if I asked a question, or if I said a whole sentence, however long it was, that's one verbal unit. So it would count the smallest thing and the biggest thing as one verbal unit if it was just me talking for that period. And so I'm very engaged with my clients. I'm a little more Rogerian in that way, in that I engage with them. I'm more psychodynamic rather than psychoanalytic. Psychodynamic usually is more relational. And he was appalled by my number of verbal units. For him, it's like it was tolerable if I had 10 or less per session. But he's like, you have the most verbal units of anyone I've ever supervised. You had like 100 verbal units one session. Yeah, like I was talking back and forth with the client. He couldn't stand that. He would get all animated. It was humorous to me in some ways, but I would talk about that in my internship class. And of course, that would then get back to Dr. Wood as the head of the internship program. So ultimately, after hearing so many such stories, Dr. Wood decided to look up Dr. Malone's profile online. So he goes to Dayspring Counseling's website, and he looks up Dr. Malone's profile on there. And while he was perusing Dayspring's website, he saw my profile. So as an intern, I had a profile, a bio, where I wrote the following as my bio. I wrote, quote, I believe changes and growth are always possible. But in some areas, wounds and unhealthy thinking and patterns of relating to others, God and ourselves can hold us back. This process can be hard work, and I am eager to help you with it. For those who are seeking a Christian approach, I believe in a biblical integration of cognitive behavioral, psychodynamic, family systems, Adlerian, and reality therapies. I have worked with individuals dealing with childhood trauma, typically sexual or physical abuse, sexual addiction, and those leaving homosexual lifestyles and coping with unwanted same-sex attractions. I have also co-facilitated a kids' play therapy group. I am looking forward to broadening my experiences at Dayspring, particularly with families and children. In addition to counseling, I work part-time with my wife as a youth pastor." Unquote. The mention of keywords like unwanted same-sex attractions, homosexual lifestyles, and change, even though I use the latter in the broadest sense, he found alarming and sufficient to immediately stop the work I was doing with my clients. It is particularly noteworthy that the concern derives solely from Dr. Wood alone, as opposed to some complaint against me from any clients or my internship site. I had been well aware of the hostility toward those who go into this field for years, as well as the hostility toward those who have made efforts to avoid conflict by opting out of gay-affirmative therapy. In the summer of 2010, 2 cases of students in counseling graduate programs faced expulsion for holding to traditional biblical views of sexuality. At Eastern Michigan University, Julia Ward, I'm not sure how she pronounces her first name, referred out a gay client to another colleague because her convictions precluded her from providing the gay relationship counseling the client was seeking. The school required she complete a remediation program and change her beliefs or be expelled. At Augusta State University in Georgia, Jennifer Keaton's expression in and out of class that she adheres to Christian beliefs regarding sexuality and gender identity was apparently enough for the school to require she undergo a re-education program or be expelled. So I was well aware of graduate school students who got in trouble for refusing or declining to see someone who's looking for gay affirmative therapy or gay couples counseling. But that wasn't the case with me. There was no inciting incident. In fact, the only client I was seeing with unwanted same-sex attraction at that time was a pre-existing group member from the group that I was running at my university who decided to see me for individual counseling as part of my internship. And he chose to continue with me at Dayspring Counseling during that summer. A detail that Dr. Wood did not even investigate even when we met. They didn't actually care about what I was actually doing. None of the clients I obtained through Dayspring were dealing with homosexuality, nor did the topic even arise. So my case is actually pretty unique. It's a precedent-setting case, but unfortunately did not go before a court, so most people aren't aware of it. But we've had cases where people were in trouble because of refusing things. Here's a situation where I was persecuted just because of my viewpoints, or my ideology, if you want to use that term on this, but not because of what I was actually doing. Now, some very interesting and encouraging events occurred after I received Dr. Wood's email on a Thursday on June 25th. First, I contacted Dr. Malone, my site supervisor. Whereas prior to this moment we struggled to connect on a personal level, I now saw a different side to him, a fiercely protective one. He and the rest of Dayspring demonstrated their support to me. Next, I informed my pastor, Bob Levins, of True North Christian Church. Without hesitation, the whole church rallied behind me. Some members even offered to provide me a lawyer for my first meeting with the school, and they paid for it. I could not afford it. And most providential of all was the timing of the whole ordeal, because the following day, from that email that I got, I was long scheduled to travel to Lancaster, PA for the Restored Hope Network's conference. Now, after Exodus had closed down in 2013, Restored Hope Network became the new umbrella organization. It already formed in 2012 before Exodus collapsed. And they had done their conferences different places, mostly out west. This is the first time they were going to be somewhere close enough for me. In fact, right there, my old stomping grounds where I grew up in Lancaster. And so when I heard that's where they're going to be, I jumped that opportunity and I scheduled to go to that. So I was already scheduled to go to Restored Hope Network's conference in Lancaster, and then I got this email the day before leaving for that conference. What better place to be after getting an email like this that I'm around other individuals who are working in this field as counselors, as ministry leaders, and people who have left homosexuality, who actually can testify to the benefit of good ministry and counseling that they've received. It was so encouraging. I as I met people, I showed them, here's the email I just got yesterday, and people prayed for me. They gave me some good advice, gave me some pointers, got me some good connections. So I had been following Restored Hope Network online for some time, wishing I would be able to attend one of their conferences, and for this to be my first conference was a major blessing. It was also very interesting timing because while we were there that Friday, that is when the U.S. Supreme Court made their decision on the Bergefeld case, which legalized gay marriage throughout the entire country. What better place to be than surrounded by those who've left homosexuality when that news dropped and we heard the announcement come as we're in the middle of the conference and we all prayed together. It was just amazing providence of timing how this all went down. I can only conclude it's by God's design in some ways. I am not Calvinist, but I do believe God can intervene in different ways, and He does at times. He can orchestrate things even without interfering with our own free will. I was blessed to meet some of my heroes in the field, such as Andrew Comiskey, as well as a client from my undergraduate internship nearly 10 years ago, he was there to share his testimony. At this conference, the first keynote address was by Christopher West, the now president of the Theology of the Body Institute, and probably the most popular speaker on Pope John Paul II's Theology of the Body. This was my introduction to Theology of the Body, and my eyes were open there, and I've been on this journey ever since then of studying Theology of the Body and trying to teach this to non-Catholics ever since. Now, as a non-denominational Protestant going to a very liberal, so-called inclusive Catholic university, I was amazed to learn how many Catholics were actually my allies. Having Christopher West speak that first day actually was amazing because that meant there was going to be a lot more Catholics at the conference than there normally are, because I've gone to multiple conferences since then. And so I got to speak to a lot of Catholics, and a few of them gave me some good advice, and they showed me that, no, we actually have your back. We support you. Because I was thinking, is the whole Catholic Church this liberal now? And it sure can seem like that when you see the crazy stuff that's going on in so many of the major Catholic dioceses and archdioceses, like in California, and you hear things like from Father James Martin and Richard Rohr. It can seem like the whole Catholic Church is now pro-LGBT. But there is a faithful remnant, and so they got me connected with some people. A few of them recommended that I contact Archbishop Chaput he was the Archbishop of Philadelphia at the time. They assured me that he would be on my side, and so after the conference, I did reach out to him, and he was encouraging to me. But he said ultimately, he has no say over what goes on at Chestnut Hill. So that was another thing I learned. I'm just going to this university. I don't know really much about it, but I find out that there's some history. There's a reputation that Chestnut Hill had. Because when I'm telling my story to different Catholics, they ask, well, which order of nuns runs the school? And so I tell them, the Sisters of St. Joseph. And I would get this response, oh, that explains it. I'm like, what do you mean? I don't know what you mean. So apparently, the Sisters of St. Joseph, who run Chestnut Hill, which you would never know because they don't wear habits, they don't dress like nuns, they have a rep for being very unorthodox. There's apparently some rumors that they are a lot of them are engaged in lesbianism, but they're super liberal, far left. And so many of the Catholics I spoke to were not surprised when I told them about what I was experiencing there. So I wish I had known that beforehand. Who knows? I probably still would have went there because of the other reasons I wanted to go there. But that helped me understand a lot more what I was experiencing. And Archbishop Chaput, he understood. Nevertheless, he still wrote a letter to the school on my behalf, and I'm very grateful for him doing that. And I kept him updated on the situation as it progressed. But he let me know this is the rot in the church that he's fighting against. At that conference, I met a new hero of mine, Dr. Mike Davidson, from the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland to be precise. He had a much more severe story of persecution himself for his own work, and yet he remained completely humble and steadfast. He also is a member of the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity, which I had known only as NARTH before then, the National Association for the Research and Therapy of Homosexuality. But here he is, he's international, and apparently in 2014, so the year prior, the NARTH changed its name to the Alliance. And mostly because they realized we have to do a lot more advocacy work now that there's these therapy bans going on. And so I got to meet with him as like the new attendees lunch, and so he actually got me connected. He offered to connect me with former Alliance president Dr. Christopher Rossick, and that started a very helpful email correspondence. And so as I was preparing to meet with the school after that email, Dr. Rossick sent me some journal articles that I could present to them. He gave me some tips based on here's what we've experienced from our legal battles against the conversion therapy ban in California. And it just led to me eventually being where I'm at. We'll get to there in a little bit. And just one thing led to another. So being there at that Restored Hope Network conference after this email from Dr. Wood was a major blessing. And I probably would not have gotten all the connections I now have if it wasn't for that email from Dr. Wood. So thank you, Dr. Wood, for trying to sabotage my career. What you meant for evil, God intended for good. He brought good out of it. Oh, also, I'm so grateful to my pastor at the time, Bob Levins. The whole time when I was at the Restored Hope Network conference, he was doing a whole bunch of legwork, looking for other legal ministries and other avenues for me, just looking for different lawyers. And so he actually contacted a bunch of these legal ministries like Alliance Defending Freedom and Liberty Counsel, and I learned some things. Unfortunately, like Alliance Defending Freedom could not take my case. They were interested in it, but their charter actually prohibits them from going after religious institutions. And since Chestnut Hill is a so-called Catholic university, they could not represent me in this situation. But eventually he was able to get me connected with the Independence Law Center, which is sort of like the Alliance Defending Freedom, except it's for Pennsylvania. So it's a legal ministry for religious liberty issues in Pennsylvania. So eventually I got connected with them. All right, back to the story. In Dr. Wood's email, he requested to meet that weekend, but I advised him I needed more time in order to seek appropriate counsel, I told him, which should have been a hint to him that I was securing a lawyer. And that's what happened. Fortunately, some people at my church got me some local lawyer. I really don't know much about the lawyer and if they would have agreed with me or not, but they decided to come and meet me there. And I'm very grateful to the members of my church who paid for this lawyer. And even though, well, this is what happened. So we ended up scheduling to meet on Tuesday, July 7th. So I got this email on June 25th, and we didn't meet until July 7th. So it was a very, very stressful 2 weeks here. And so I met with Dr. Nicholas Wood and Dr. Rachel Sachs, who was my advisor, though I had never met her. I've gone through a few advisors. I never met with any of them. They just kept changing up who my advisor was. So those were the two that I was going to meet with. And to their apparent surprise, I arrived with a lawyer. However, they informed us that as professors, the school prohibited them from meeting with a lawyer without the school's own lawyer present. And I thought that was a bit sneaky of them, because I made it clear I'm seeking counsel. That should have been a good hint. Oh, he's going to get a lawyer. He's lawyering up. I would have thought that they would then be prepared with their lawyer as well. But they didn't, so they gave me a choice. We can either reschedule, or you can send your lawyer outside the room and we can meet just with you. but they also assured me that this meeting was just to gather information, and no decision would be made then. Instead, they would report to the other program coordinators, Dr. Leslie Park Strelo and Dr. Garcia-Leeds, as well as the dean of the graduate school, Dr. Barbara Hogan. So, I thought about it for a moment, and I chose to dismiss my lawyer and meet with them on my own instead. I was confident that I would need to do only two things. Point out that my admissions record shows I was open about my history of involvement in the ex-gay ministry field, and explain how I was not practicing any sort of bizarre or inherently harmful therapy, but just applying what I had been learning to a unique client population that had goals to live congruently with both their belief systems and biological design. I figured that the truth was so much on my side that that's all I would need to do. If anything, they would just sort of say, mea culpa, we'll change our policies to make it explicitly clear going forward that no one can be admitted if they disagree with our worldview on these issues. And let me just finish things up and graduate. So actually, here's some notes that I took immediately after the meeting. So here's more of my raw take on the whole thing. So after I dismissed my lawyer, I walked into the room with them, and Dr. Wood mentioned how they originally wanted to meet with me last week, but I delayed it. So I replied, if you just wanted information, you should have just called me or asked to meet with me. But you threw the gauntlet down when you told me to stop my internship immediately. That showed me that a judgment was already being made. Unquote. So it's like, I'm already fired up here. He told me that it's standard procedure to have the students stop all work whenever there's an issue with the internship. But as it turned out, there was no issue until he decided to make one out of the blue and just 4 weeks before finishing. And so then he confirmed what I had suspected, that this all started because he looked up Dr. Malone on Dayspring's website, and then while there he saw my bio. And he looked up my bio and he got alarmed at the parts about helping people leaving homosexuality and coping with unwanted same-sex attraction. So they told me the meeting was just informational and denied that they would be making any recommendation. I don't believe that, because it was Dr. Wood, so even at the time I didn't believe that, because it was Dr. Wood who instigated this whole thing. I pointed out to them that I had been upfront since the admissions process about my beliefs and involvement in the ex-gay ministry field, and I was accepted with that understanding. He said they did not look up my admissions packet. So you're coming to this meeting and you didn't even look up my own admissions packet and a little more of my history? It's ridiculous. They didn't do their own legwork. Well, if they were on a fact-finding mission, wouldn't that be the logical place to start? So I'm getting amped up as I think about it more. So here's how it went. They had a lot of questions about my involvement in the field, how and why I started doing this type of work, what I believe. So I just told them my story about everything with Valley Forge and starting up that group there. And Dr. Sachs asked, what's the difference between pastoral counseling and what you do? And I explained that I believe pastoral counselors are mostly equipped to address spiritual concerns and crises of faith, but they're not always trained to deal with mental health issues. I identify as a Christian therapist because I base my theoretical orientation upon a biblical framework. That's why I can integrate seemingly conflicting theories, such as ones that emphasize the unconscious and ones that emphasize free will, because I keep the aspects that fit a biblical framework. It also means I am values disclosive. I believe I ought to disclose my values and convictions when it is relevant to the client's case, particularly in advance as part of the informed consent process. Besides, I expect that most people would be seeing me specifically because I am a Christian counselor. They asked if I would see a gay client. I told them it would depend on what issue that client was facing. If they were looking for help with depression, no problem. If they were looking for gay-affirmative therapy, help them go through the coming out continuum and work on a homosexual relationship that they're in, I would not be a good match. And there is no lack of gay-affirmative therapists out there that I could refer that client to. They asked if I was familiar with the informed consent process and the ACA's, American Counseling Association, ethical guidelines regarding this type of work. And when they say type of work, They're just lumping together all non-gay affirmative therapy under reparative therapy or SOCE, sexual orientation change efforts. So they're just using that as a big umbrella for any type of, whether ministry or self-help or therapy. I explained that I knew the informed consent process must include disclaiming any guarantees of change in same-sex attraction, and that if at any point they change their minds on pursuing this type of work, they can just let me know and I can help them find more appropriate help. They asked if I knew of any outcome studies of the efficacy of such work. I told them that there are not many studies available, but I did point them to the longitudinal study Mark Yarhouse and Stanton Jones did that followed participants of different Exodus ministries. Now, that doesn't mean that it's exclusively about therapy, but it does include people who did both religious and self-help groups, as well as received actual therapy. The study showed that some experienced no change in SSA, some had significant change, and a smaller amount experienced complete change. So no, complete change in attraction is not likely, but not impossible. They were very concerned that I was not following the ACA's guideline of not just informing clients of the efficacy, or lack thereof, but also of the potential for harm. And that's where I really disputed them. I disputed them on this because I know, or I knew at the time, that there are no studies that clearly show that reparative therapy, or SOCE, directly causes harm to clients. They said the ACA's position paper cites studies that show harm, but they could not tell me what the studies actually were or showed. I asked them. At one point I challenged Dr. Wood, please tell me, how is it harmful? How? He couldn't provide no answer. He couldn't cite the studies. He couldn't say, well, here's how these studies, how these therapies are harmful, what they actually do that is harmful. He did, though, say that all the professional organizations believe it is potentially harmful. So who am I, as a student with just 1 year of supervised experience, to disagree with them? I couldn't believe he just said that. Okay, that's just a fallacy of a genetic fallacy argument. I reminded him that I am not the only person who shares these beliefs. All the therapists in a Restored Hope network and others that have been in the ex-gay movement with a combined experience of over 30 years would share my sentiment. I have met with them, interviewed some of them, read their works. So no, I'm not just some kid making things up. I also added, I don't know where the ACA got its policy, but if they got it straight from the APA, the American Psychological Association, I know that the task force used to make the policy was comprised entirely of gay therapists. So that was a biased conclusion. So look up things on the bias in the APA's task force report on appropriate therapeutic responses to sexual orientation. There were therapists like Joe Nicolosi and even Mark Yarhouse and a few others who applied to be part of that task force, and they were denied outright because of their worldview differing from those who were conducting the task force. They were not looking for ideological diversity. They had one agenda: to prove that so-called SOCE, sexual orientation change efforts, or so-called reparative therapy or conversion therapy, which wasn't really a term used at the time, was innately harmful and ineffective. And they didn't want anyone with a differing viewpoint to be part of that committee. Dr. Sachs asked me how I would notice if one of my clients was being harmed by this type of therapy. My answer? If the client's values and goals change from what they were at the start of treatment, then yes, it would be harmful for us to continue this type of work. She kept asking, how would I know if that was the case? So I pointed out, well, you check with the client. They would have to inform me, and I would have to check in on the client's feelings regularly, which is really just good practice in general. This is why I know a lot of my clients, but I ask them frequently, what do you want to work on? And if your goals have changed, where are you at with this? I'm constantly checking their motivations. I don't assume that whatever they came in with is how they'll stay. They may change their mind. So that's good therapy, periodically checking in. Finally, she asked if I would tell by the client becoming more depressed. I said, no, because there is always a chance in any therapy for negative emotions to increase, especially if they're doing trauma work. So no, I would not consider that a good indicator that they're being harmed by my therapy. if they're going through a period of depression. And as I was saying that, it even looked like Dr. Wood was nodding in agreement with what I was saying. Besides, at the time, I was not doing reparative therapy, meaning a therapy that was to help people change the actual attractions. That was not the intended goal of the therapy I was doing. Though I had no problem with reparative therapy or any therapy to help people changing their attractions, and I actually, even at the time, was fighting for the right for people to obtain it. I considered myself an advocate of that type of therapy, but I was not actually doing that type of work. Now, they did not seem familiar with the different approaches in the field. To them, if it's not encouraging someone to embrace a gay identity and lifestyle, they just group it all together. So I had to do some basic teaching with them and explain the differences between reparative therapy, such as by Joseph Nicolosi Sr., and other approaches, like Mark Yarhouse's and Warren Throckmorton's sexual identity therapy, which just assume people have a certain orientation and just helps them live more congruently with their religious values. Reparative therapy conceptualizes SSA as being rooted in unmet developmental needs or trauma. And so the focus is on building the attachment with the therapist and processing early wounds. And this therapy is very psychodynamic in style. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to go to a psychodynamic school. Whereas Mark Yarhouse prefers to be agnostic toward the ideology of the SSA and makes no claims about how to change it at all. His approach is just to help people who prefer to identify by their spiritual identity as Christians versus their sexual identity as same-sex attracted individuals. The goal of sexual identity therapy is just to help them live more congruently with their faith. They asked me what this type of therapy looks like, and I replied that it's just like any therapy. They're not focusing on the past so much, so it probably is very CBT in style. And most ex-gay ministries also incorporate a group component. I explained that my personal approach is in between the two. I believe anything is possible, but I tend to try to focus more on what actually can change, at least in my group setting. So when I was writing my group, I focused on, hey, let's just work on healing of trauma, of growing in assertiveness, on working on emotional regulation, on forgiveness, on developing a community of support, on being seen and known. Okay? Those are things we can work on. If the feelings changed as a byproduct, great. And some of the guys in the group expressed that would happen, which actually is very consistent with actual reparative therapy and now reintegrative therapy. The understanding is that the feelings change only as a byproduct of doing this deeper work. So, as I explained, with all of these approaches, if the SSA changes at all, it is viewed as a work of God and just a result of healing in other areas of someone's life. Even reparative therapists don't claim that they can directly change someone's SSA. I understood this at that time. And they especially do not claim that they can categorically change someone's orientation. So I explained that all approaches emphasize that change lies on a continuum. But it's like one ear out the other because they didn't really care about what I had to say about the different approaches. They just had a lot of other questions and challenges for me. It's like they came with all these talking points all prepared. What about studies that show homosexual behavior among animals? I wanted to laugh. That's such a stupid question. So I was ready for a rebuttal. I'm like, you mean the studies that show homosexual behavior to show dominance and aggression? Not to mention I find it offensive to compare humans to animals. I don't consider us animals at all. God specially made us in his image. So no, I would not say those studies have any validity. No response. I kept having to correct them when they said this type of work. They kept referring to whatever I was doing as this type of work. And so I kept having to correct them when they would say that this type of work is in conflict with the ACA. If it were entirely in conflict, it would be banned outright. Instead, the ACA currently, or at least at the time, just has precautions that they issue. So I never violated any actual practice standards. They brought up the collapse of Exodus and that stupid apology from Alan Chambers that he issued to the gay world saying he's sorry for the damage that Exodus has done. I explained that Exodus collapsed because the few remaining leaders had a change in philosophy and theology to being gay-affirmative. They did not continue to hold to biblical standards and just felt that the way Exodus was operating was ineffective. I also informed them of how several member ministries left Exodus in advance and formed Restored Hope Network. They also asked if I was aware of the ex-gay organization in New Jersey that was just convicted of consumer fraud. They were referring to JONAH, a Jewish ex-gay ministry, which I was familiar with because when I was at the Restored Hope Network conference, in one of our breakout sessions, Christopher Doyle was there, and he had just been to the JONAH trial and testified there. And so he gave us an update on it, and he shared how the judge gave such unfair stipulations, and the burden of proof was so insane that the judge was requiring that they had to prove in order to acquit JONAH. So I informed them of how unfair the lawsuit was. They did everything by the book with the informed consent, and they still were sued and convicted. And the judge told the jury that if they found evidence of making claims of success, or if they ever referred to homosexuality as any kind of disorder, they must find them guilty. I would not consider that a fair trial at all. At one point, Dr. Sachs tried to summarize that I consider SSA to be pathological. I restated that I believe it is an unintended consequence of multiple factors, primarily either unmet developmental needs or trauma. And I prefer not to use the word pathological in general. So she rephrased things to say, but basically you would not agree with the ACA's stance that homosexuality is just an alternative way of expressing normal sexuality. So I answered, no, I would definitely not agree with that. I would not consider it normal sexuality. God's design for normal sexuality is man and woman. There's complementarity there. Unquote. Finally, they had a lot of questions about my professional goals and my professional identity. Would I continue to do this type of work? I told them, as a Christian counselor, I plan to deal with a variety of cases from a biblical perspective. I would not limit myself just to this issue, but it is one of my specialties. But what if it became illegal, they said. And this started to get me pretty angry because they're just dealing in hypotheticals. So I said, it's not illegal now. It's not unethical now. The therapy hasn't changed, just the law, if such a law were to pass. So if it's not unethical now for those who are looking for it, what changes just because the law changed? And why should it become illegal? All we're doing is talking with people about their past and helping them live more congruently with their faith. Not forcing anything on them, we're just having a conversation. Why should that be illegal? But Dr. Wood persisted. I'm not the policymaker, so what if it did become illegal? And so I said, well, if it became illegal, and I felt it had no reason to be, and there was no alternative for people who did not want gay-affirmative therapy, then I guess I would be in a position where I would have to practice civil disobedience. And that's probably what got me in the most trouble, saying that last part. Oh, and this was also pretty damaging to them, I would say. Dr. Wood kept asking me why I chose to even come to Chestnut Hill, knowing how secular the program is. And I said, it's a Catholic university, an inclusive one, but I guess not as inclusive as you guys make it sound. And so he said, yes, the school is Catholic, but the graduate program is secular. Well, I didn't know that until after I got accepted and started and saw how the professors aren't even Christians. Now, this is false advertising on the school's part, because there is no indication that the graduate program, the graduate psych program, is secular. And I made it clear in my admissions letter that I hoped, as a Catholic university, they would respect my beliefs and convictions. In the end, Dr. Wood asked if I had anything else to say. I told him that I want to be reinstated retroactively. They could give me no time frame for when a decision would be made. I asked how they can ensure that I will graduate on time. They just shrugged and said they don't know. I asked for clarification on whether or not I am suspended. Dr. Wood agreed that functionally I am suspended, but officially I am not, since no decision has been made. I asked why I could not be in my class, my internship class, where we talk about our internship experiences. I was doing great in that class, I'm enjoying the discussions, and then all of a sudden I wasn't allowed to go to my class. So I asked why I could not be in my class, and he said because it is still part of the internship experience. So since they're suspending my internship, I can't go to the class. I asked if I was considered a danger to my classmates, and he said no. So then ultimately I summarize that basically this is a conflict over ideologies. And Dr. Wood said, you could say that. Afterwards, I filled in my lawyer, told her how the whole thing went. She recommended that I contact them if I don't hear anything by that Thursday. I met with them on a Tuesday, and which I ended up having to do. I didn't hear from them after that meeting for a few business days, so I emailed Dr. Wood on that Thursday afternoon. And I didn't get a response, and so I wrote down this reflection that Sunday night. He didn't respond to my internship site supervisor when he emailed them that it would be clinically inappropriate without any evidence of malpractice for me to stop seeing my clients all of a sudden. So fortunately, my internship site had my back, and I was able to finish my internship there, even though the school wasn't letting me count my hours at that time. But the internship practice, they supported me, and they're like, you didn't do anything wrong. You can continue with the clients you've been seeing with us. That's how that inquisition went. They said a lot of stupid things, you ask me, and they really were just going off of the mainstream talking points against the work we do, and they really had no interest in what I was actually doing. If I was actually doing any sort of therapy with clients that was harmful. But just the fact that I put on my bio that I have experience. The other thing is they kept saying that I was advertising. They viewed me putting in my bio that I have experience doing this type of work, that was me doing an advertisement because posted online on the Dayspring website. And they would argue that, oh, you are saying you're an expert. I never said I was an expert. I said I have experience working with a variety of things. Sexual addiction, doing a kids play therapy group. All right. In no way does that say that I'm an expert. I understood there's more required to be an expert in anything. Now I would probably say I'm an expert. Now that I have to have way more training and experience. At the time, I wouldn't say I had expertise. I knew a lot more than most other individuals, that for sure, though. But they insinuated that because I put that I have experience, that makes me an expert, and so I'm misrepresenting myself, that I'm falsely advertising myself as an expert. It was just such bogus arguments they were making. So they had all these challenges for me, but I had an answer for every one. I do not believe that they were prepared for me being prepared. And so I really felt the prayers of everyone who was praying for me at that time. I came into that meeting, I was not intimidated. I knew that God was with me. After my inquisition with Dr. Wood and Dr. Sachs, I had some additional thoughts about some of the questions and challenges they brought up. After the meeting, I was wondering why Dr. Sachs asked about pastoral counseling. What's the difference between what you're doing and pastoral counseling? It occurred to me that they are probably insinuating that same-sex attracted clients who are having a conflict between their faith and sexuality should just sort it out with the pastor. That this work should just be relegated to pastoral care and kept out of professional therapy. But I firmly believe that clients should have the right to pursue professional help with whatever emotional issue they're facing, and there should be the right for clinicians to offer it. And really, it's just a matter of time before they start coming after pastors as well, who are offering this sort of help, or ministries. And as we now, at the time I said that, this is 2015, since then, certain countries, and California tried to do this as well for pastors and ministries, but certain countries have outlawed it even for non-clinicians. So I predicted it, and it happened pretty quickly after. But here's my main point. If it's not a disorder, what business is it of the APA or ACA how someone chooses to address it? It should be no different from a client expressing distress over a failed marriage. A failed marriage in itself is not a disorder. There's no diagnosis code for that. So, at least not aside from like a V code, like a secondary diagnosis code. Right? So there is no clinical protocol for treating it. We leave that up to the clients. And when I say clinical protocol, I'm not referring to there's no such thing as marital counseling, but rather there are no treatment goals that you assign that are required that the client agree to and that you agree to. It's up to the clients themselves how they deal with whatever their marital conflict is. If they want a divorce, they have the right to seek a professional for help through that process. If they want to improve the marriage, they have the right to seek professional help with that. So it should be the same if you have a conflict over your sexual attraction, feelings, and behaviors. If it's not a disorder, it's not in the DSM, then it should be up to the client how they address that. That's respecting the client's right for self-determination. Another reflection I had: why could they not answer me when I asked how such work is potentially harmful? How is it? What is the actual thing that I'm doing that is harmful? And the reason is because the only reason people assume SOCE, or sexual orientation change efforts, is harmful is because they assume that SSA is inborn, genetic, and immutable. If those points were true, then I would have to agree that it would be harmful to pursue therapy to change one's attractions. But their premise is false. There is no evidence that SSA is genetic or inborn. In fact, the twin studies alone are proof enough that it is not genetic. In the early 2000s, Australia, which is a very pro-gay nation, took the entire twin registry and found that when one identical twin was gay or same-sex attracted, only about 20% of the times was the other twin also same-sex attracted or identified as gay. And as for immutability, I have known enough people, I just met a bunch of them at that Restored Hope Network conference, that have experienced change in their SSA and orientation to refute that lie. So the very claim that SOCE is inherently harmful, intrinsically harmful, has no basis. It's really just a matter of you disagreeing based on ideology with the client's own goals. And Dr. Sachs repeated to me the APA stance that homosexuality is a normal alternative expression of human sexuality. And for one, that is a moral and philosophical judgment the APA, as a so-called psychological and scientific organization, is unqualified to make. This is the lie that the world is pushing. And yet I argue that everyone who believes homosexuality is normal is really quite hypocritical. Here's why. The only reason people say homosexuality is normal is because, at least on an unconscious level, they understand that it is actually abnormal. Only, at the time of me writing this, only 2% of the US population is exclusively homosexual in their main proclivities, in the sole direction of their attractions, what we might call orientation. Only 2% is exclusively same-sex attracted. So, remember that. Because if something is intrinsically good, then it should not matter at what point in history it occurs. Agreed? This would be logical, right? It shouldn't matter if the majority of the population was primarily or exclusively same-sex attracted here in the 21st century or the 8th century. Okay? Also, if something is intrinsically good, then the consequences of everyone participating in it should be either neutral or good. But if all of humanity were homosexual in their behaviors, then we would have ceased to exist within one generation. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. So everyone that says they are pro-gay is actually deceived or in denial that they are grateful only 2% is gay or same-sex attracted or gay in their identity and behavior. But what if sexuality was expressed only in monogamous, committed marriages between man and woman? I could think of only good consequences. No babies out of wedlock, no affairs, no STDs or STIs, no molestation and incest, no rape, less unwanted pregnancies and abortions, less divorce, more security in marriage, less single-parent homes. The only ones would be from one parent dying. Less poverty. Children would grow up with the needs for both parents being met. It's a net positive if at any point in history everyone was exclusively limiting their sexual expression to monogamous, faithful, committed marriages between a man and woman. But if homosexuality is treated as something that's so normal that then we should have no problem if everyone was homosexual. So when you're claiming you're pro-gay, you are actually saying, well, I make an allowance for it if it's a small part of the population. Well, as this number is growing, we're in a bit of a population crisis, as we're seeing all across the Western world. Birth rates are way down. So just a sociological perspective, you don't have to bring in religion to make a case for how homosexuality is abnormal and even detrimental to society at large. And about the questions about whether or not I would continue to do this work if it was banned. The psychology world has always been about challenging the system when it was wrong. We're supposed to stand up against injustice. It's not the school's concern what type of therapy I will be doing with my degree. I've been an exemplary, or this is what I wrote in reflection. I was an exemplary straight A student. I had no complaints against me. And they ought to give me, or they should have given me, the degree I rightfully earned. But look at the bias here. If my bio on Dayspring's website had said that I help people come out of the closet and embrace gay identities, we would not be having this conversation. There would be no suspicions about me pushing my values onto clients, or potentially harming them, or claiming to have some sort of expertise I didn't have, or false advertising. If I said, oh, I'm pro-LGBT, I'm pro-rainbow, I support all these sexual identities and gender identities, and I work with clients going through the coming out continuum. If that was in my bio, they would have had no problem with that. I would be viewed as a champion for the downtrodden. But instead, I fight for the rights of people to obtain alternative help for unwanted SSA, and I'm painted as a potential criminal. Welcome to the new world. This is 2015 I wrote that, 10 years ago, and it's proven itself to be more and more true. So after that meeting on July 7th, I got to work updating people and making appeals for aid. Just help me out in any way, pray for me. If you have any more recommendations of what I can do. I contacted Archbishop Chaput, who wrote a letter on my behalf, though we both knew the school was not under his jurisdiction. Dr. Rossick, Christopher Rossick, from the Alliance of Therapeutic Choice, sent me a journal article delineating the different approaches to unwanted SSA. SOCE or reorientation types approaches versus sexual identity therapy versus gay-affirmative therapy. And so I forwarded that to the department heads to show, hey, these are different points of view, and this is from a journal that was actually an APA journal that Dr. Rossick had published that article from. And I wrote to the board myself as well, not trusting Dr. Wood and Dr. Sachs to represent my side to the other members accurately. Because, I'm like, all right, I do not trust this guy to explain everything that I just shared with them accurately to the board. So I wrote to them as well. On July 14th, just over a week after our meeting, I received the following email from the Dean of the Graduate School, Dr. Barbara Hogan. It read, quote, Dear Mr. Rodriguez, on behalf of Chestnut Hill College, I want to reply to your questions about returning to your internship and graduating. According to Item 9 in the Clinical Experience Affiliation Agreement attached, the college has the right and responsibility to suspend or terminate any students from the clinical experience whose behavior is a serious violation of the college's formal policies. In accord with the terms of that agreement, we are notifying you that your internship at Dayspring is terminated. Your ethical violations of the college's formal policy include, but are not limited to, offering a form of counseling that is not supported by research, is contrary to professional standards and codes of ethics, ACA Code of Ethics, Section C7, treatment modalities, American Psychological Association, evidence-based practice in psychology, blah, blah, put in her citations, as well as college policies, and is unlike anything taught in your graduate program at this college. Further, you did not disclose the fact that you were offering this form of counseling and supervision with your faculty supervisor at this college. Dismissal from field placement due to a serious ethical violation is grounds for dismissal from this college's master's program in clinical and counseling psychology. However, the college is willing to offer you a remediation plan that will permit you to graduate after its terms are met. The college will permit you to withdraw from your current internship, which would give you a grade of W on your transcript. and undertake a new internship at a different site in accord with the terms of a remediation plan. Please let me know if you wish to meet with the faculty in your program to review the details of a proposed remediation plan for your consideration. You are welcome to contact me with questions or concerns. We wish you well as you consider how you would like to proceed. Sincerely, Dr. Hogan." Unquote. Aren't they so merciful? Make note of a few aspects of this letter. She speaks of a form of counseling I was performing without naming it. The insinuation is clearly that I was practicing some form of therapy, such as reparative therapy, with the stated goal to change a client's sexual attractions or orientation from homosexual to heterosexual. It is abundantly obvious that everything I shared at my meeting was misconstrued and misrepresented. What exactly was I doing that was not supported by research? All I was doing, as I stated in the meeting, was applying commonly accepted therapeutic techniques, which I learned at Chestnut Hill College, at my internship, and over the years prior to and outside my graduate school education, to assist members of a minority population in a way respectful of their values. So, are they in effect implying that the psychodynamic and family systems techniques they teach are not supported by research? How about the Rogerian, cognitive behavioral, and dialectical behavioral therapy techniques that I learned from various other trainings? Are they insinuating that they are not supported by research? No, they are assuming, despite having no evidence, that I was practicing some bizarre, dangerous form of counseling, which is how they wrongly perceived reparative therapy, which I was not actually performing. Like I said, I was aware of Dr. Nicolosi's developmental model and the basics of reparative therapy, but I was not trained in it, so I was not actually practicing reparative therapy. And in some ways, I was more like Yarhouse and Throckmorton in sexual identity therapy because I was just working with people in living congruently with their values, using mainstream counseling techniques. I was not trained adequately in trauma reprocessing and emotion-focused therapy and body work that are more at the core of Nicolosi's approach, whether it's reparative therapy or the new reintegrative therapy. So I never claimed to be a reparative therapist, never did I make change of someone's sexual attractions the goal of therapy. So evidently, Dr. Hogan was either extremely obtuse or willfully dishonest, or both. There was no basis to claim that what I was doing was unlike anything taught in my graduate program, unless she means that I was not following the ideological doctrine they had hoped to implant in me by this point in my education. A forthright admission would be that they disagreed with how I was using my clinical training, not that I was veering from it, which is also to say that they believed they should have control over a client's stated goals regarding his sexual identity and behavior. And the bonus rationale for terminating my internship, that I failed to inform my internship class teacher that I was offering help for unwanted same-sex attraction, was both false and irrelevant. I mentioned repeatedly in class that I had a biography on Dayspring's website. If my professor was curious about my biography, it was publicly available. I saw no need to mention the single SSA client I had in my class because the case was quite manageable at the time. There was no requirement in the class that I provide a description of each client in my caseload. Therefore, if I was experiencing no difficulties with my clients, there was nothing to share. Regardless, the specific wording in Dr. Hogan's letter was a way to sidestep an admission of the school's awareness of my open involvement in this field of work. As I demonstrated earlier, I made known my work repeatedly throughout my academic career. It just so happened to be the case that I did not see the need to mention it at my internship class. But Dr. Wood, the very head of the internship program, should have remembered knowing about my work from prior experience with me, a fact he never acknowledged in the course of my debacle. Dr. Garcia-Leeds, one of the department heads, also knew, as I mentioned earlier. And then their so-called remediation plan to redo an entire year's worth of internship work was a ridiculous affront to me. Considering it was just 4 weeks away from finishing and the fact that the school should have intervened far sooner in my career, there, if they considered my convictions incompatible with their program, the wiser course of action would have been to allow me to finish, graduate me, and then update their policies to be explicit about this topic. There is no policy saying you cannot work with people who have unwanted same-sex attraction in a way that might help them live congruently with non-gay affirmative lifestyle. Nothing explicit about that. I was certain I sent a clear message that I was unwilling to be bullied. So I was disappointed by their decision. Because I'm like, you should have got by now that I don't back down. All right, I'm not a confrontational person, but I will not back down from a fight. And that's from years of having to stand up to authority figures who are in the wrong. So God instilled that through experiences in me. He was like preparing me throughout my life for this particular fight. From issues at my college, issues at one of my old churches, issues at job sites. So God was preparing me for the moment where I would have to really stand up for something that would have way more at stake, way more weight to it. So I was like, I can't believe they're going to do this. Now they just got a big fight on their hands. So that meant now, once I got that news, I reached out to the Independence Law Center. They're like a legal ministry, or they help out with religious liberty situations specifically for Pennsylvania. Like I mentioned earlier, as my pastor was doing some digging while I was at the Restored Hope Network conference, we found out that the Alliance Defending Freedom has in their charter that they cannot go after a religious institution. And even though Chestnut Hill's graduate program was secular, the school itself is Catholic. So they couldn't actually go after them. But fortunately, I reached out to the Independence Law Center, and they took my case pro bono, thank God. I mean, that's what they do. And I met with two lawyers from there, Randall Wenger and Jeremy Samek. And this, you could tell they were a bit green, at least when it came to this particular issue. And really, this was a unique case. I don't know of any other cases where someone in graduate school got kicked out of grad school because of helping people with unwanted same-sex attraction. Like I said, there are only other cases where people referred out clients looking for gay affirmative therapy. But I had no complaints from any of my clients. I never rejected someone for counseling. So this was a unique situation. So I thank God they took my case. They were eager to help me, and over the next 4 months, provided me with sound counsel and prevented me from making rash decisions. This took a while. And now, I guess, in hindsight, I know of other legal situations that stretch out over years. So I suppose it could have lasted longer. But when I was eager to finish up my grad school and get to work counseling, I had a job waiting for me, but they told me, we can't hire you until you get your degree, until you finish your class, and this whole situation's behind you. It was so aggravating. There was plenty of times where I was yelling, and I got on the phone with Jeremy and Randy and said, can we just sue them? Can we take this to court? And we didn't appeal to any journalists. It didn't make the news. We tried to keep it on the down low and just try to keep the objective, just graduate. Graduate, and your best revenge is to work in the field and have a successful career. But boy, there's times I really want to stick it to them. That's for sure. It's important to note, though, that at the time, they've now faced more situations like this, I think, or they've now dabbled more in somewhat similar cases, that Randy and Jeremy, they were completely new, though of course sympathetic, to the type of work we do in this field. And they were unfamiliar with the legal and systemic challenges that we face as therapists who do therapy for those with unwanted same-sex attraction. So I consider this, when I wrote about this in 2015, I consider this a sign that we need to do a much better job of informing and familiarizing the public, as well as targeted parties such as lawyers, legislators, school administrators, and churches, with what we do in our field. What's the truth? Now we are 10 years later. And this is why I'm so passionate about dispelling myths about so-called conversion therapy and SOCE and reparative therapy and reintegrative therapy and sexual orientation and gender identity. Because people need to know the truth about what actually happens in good counseling, good ethical counseling for these issues. And not just opponents and bystanders, but even our own allies aren't really familiar. I get requests sometimes from people like, oh, can you come and talk about this? And they think that I'm preaching to people that they need to change their orientation, that they need to, that all we're doing is just telling people what's right and what's wrong, preaching at them morality. I'm like, no, 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 that's not what's involved in this therapy. It's helping people explore things in a careful, mindful way and gain insight and healing of what's underneath. We're not moralizing our clients. So there's a lot of misconceptions even from our supporters. So that's why it's my mission on my YouTube channel to dispel the myths, correct the narrative. And I would say, yeah, over the past 10 years since this happened, I've at least done as much as I could. What I have found at the time when I was writing this was that the common conservative may argue for the protection of traditional marriage, but he's still reticent to support our therapies because the myths about harm and lack of benefit have infiltrated his consciousness so much. In their effort to keep me focused on the main goal of graduating, Jeremy and Randy were also determined to resolve my case diplomatically and quietly. So it received absolutely no media attention. And that's one of the things I do regret. They told me, hey, let's just try to get this done, get graduated. Ultimately, though, we were able to reach a settlement without going to court, so I could indeed graduate. And so I don't regret that. All right? So now I have suspicions about some things. When I went for my licensing exam, someone apparently filed a complaint with my state board against me, claiming I'm a conversion therapist, etc. And I didn't find out until after I already did my exam, because it was November, and then I received a complaint in like the beginning of March the next year. And the wording, I wasn't given the name of who made the complaint. It wasn't a client. It was someone anonymous who probably just watches my YouTube channel. But the way it was worded made me wonder if it was someone from Chestnut Hill who's been tracking me online. And when they saw that I was finally going to go for my licensing exam, tried to prevent me from getting my license. Because the words I used was that he's a threat to the field of psychology or the field of therapy. And those are the exact words they used about me in my interrogation. Now, anyone could say that, but it made me wonder. I don't really know. I don't keep track of these people. As soon as I graduate, I said goodbye to that place and I haven't looked back. So after I met with Randy and Jeremy from the Independence Law Center, they got in touch with the school, started speaking with the school's lawyer, and eventually we scheduled a meeting August 11th, 2015. And the details of this meeting, it was an arbitration and kind of a settlement type meeting. We had to sign confidentiality agreements, so kind of like an NDA. I really didn't like that, but my lawyers told me that's standard practice, so I'm not allowed to share what was said at that meeting. I can say that I was advised to refrain from speaking as much as possible and allow Jeremy and Randy to attempt negotiation. And I let them, but there were a couple points I did jump in. I couldn't stand some of the lies that were coming from the other side. Now, Randy and Jeremy were the most diplomatic lawyers you could find. They really were sincere and very kind in how they dealt with everything. Way kinder than me. I have a fire in my belly. And yeah, when injustice is happening, I don't hide my emotions, okay? I don't have much of a poker face. So when I'm ticked off, it's all over my face. You can see it. So, and in my voice, and my facial expressions, and body language, all that. So they definitely had to step in and do a lot of the speaking and really try to be soft and gentle, even though they're aggressing against me. So, but despite their sincerest efforts at diplomacy, they shared with me during a break how surprised they were by the level of hostility coming from the other side. Like, as much as I was angry at how they were treating me, the other side started off aggressive. So we offered some sort of compromise at the end of that meeting, and we had to wait. And we waited and waited. And a month went by waiting for the answer. And that was immensely frustrating. And what happened, which really ticks me off, why we're waiting so long for a response to them, is that while we were waiting, the school took it upon themselves to go around all of Philadelphia to other potential internship sites to find a new internship site for me. But of course, to each site they contacted, they shared their version of events that I committed ethical violations at my previous site. So naturally, each site refused to accept me. And so after amassing a number of rejections, the school decided that they did not want me to return as a student at all. So, here's how I was still able to graduate from the very school that kicked me out. In Pennsylvania, and I imagine most states, you need 48 credits for a master's in counseling. However, for licensure, there's an additional 12 credits, so you need a total of 60 credits. The extra 12 credits you can choose to complete at once while in your graduate school program or after graduation and prior to taking your test for licensure. I was on track for the 60 credits, but my plan was to finish my internship, graduate, and I would have one course remaining, which I would have taken after I paid off some school debt. I actually put off taking this class. It was the multicultural counseling class because so many of my classmates told me, oh, the professor teaching this one is so awful. So I was waiting it out, hoping someone else would teach that course at some point. I'm relieved I didn't take it there because it probably would have just led to more arguments as they're just spitting a bunch of woke talking points at the class, and I would have disputed them. So it's a good thing I didn't take that course at Chestnut Hill. It would have just led to a lot more arguments in class. So anyway, upon expulsion, the school's offer was to grant me my degree for the 48 credits earned and then transfer over the remaining credits to another university. However, they would not count the hours I earned toward my internship that final session in the summer, which really was where I earned the majority of my internship hours because it took me so long to build up a caseload. So this really left me in a bind as I searched for a sympathetic school that would accept me without requiring I do my work all over again. And eventually what happened is I was able to find a solution through Cairn University. They used to be called Philadelphia Biblical University. And they graciously accepted me and enabled me to finish all my coursework for licensure in the spring of 2016. So I was able to take that last course there, and then a course on biblical foundations of counseling. And I went to the internship class, but I didn't have to redo my internship. Unfortunately, I had all the hours I needed because Dayspring allowed me to finish up my clients as they rightly needed me to. So that's how I still ended up able to graduate with a lower degree, but then get the credits I needed. So that is why I still have a diploma from Chestnut Hill College, but I do not display it because I hate that school. Now, upon reflecting on this whole ordeal and the array of interactions with Chestnut Hill College, I have identified some points that may be of use for colleagues and hopeful students going into graduate school. What became increasingly apparent to me was the utter lack of reasoning behind the LGBT agenda in academia and psychology. And yet they hold the bulk of power in these areas. Therefore, a dismissive attitude is less than prudent. We can't just act like it's no big deal that the gay agenda exists and has so much power in our institutions. They attempted to make the case that it is inappropriate for a graduate student to have a biography posted at all, and to list areas of experience is equivalent to claiming expertise in an area. I never claimed expertise, and a plain reading of my biography would not suggest it either. Should a biography not include professional and personal experiences that inform readers of my familiarities and values? The school officials appeared to make the assumption that any counseling experience and trainings received prior to or outside of my courses were non-existent. Their objection to listing the types of people with which I have worked was an obvious mask for their bias against the type of work I was doing. For I am certain there would have been no objection if I stated in my biography that I hypothetically worked for years as a technician at a drug and alcohol rehab. They would not red flag that as a claim to substance abuse expertise. They also repeatedly referred to my biography as an advertisement, with the implication that I was seeking out clients to put through conversion therapy. This was a rather ludicrous perspective because it is perfectly reasonable to expect a therapist to market himself, especially at a small group practice where I had to rely on myself to build up my own caseload, and to include in his marketing some biographical data. But to label the biography an advertisement in and of itself is dishonest because it was posted only on Dayspring's website, along with all the other therapists' biographies, and not sent out to other media outlets. Furthermore, it is erroneous to conclude that I was advertising reparative therapy, however one understands it, services just by mentioning my experiences. I also noted that I used to co-facilitate a children's play therapy group, yet had no intention of running such a group at Dayspring. What I am selling in the biography is myself, and my attributes that potential clients may care to know in order to determine the type of therapist I am. I described myself as a Christian therapist, while understanding that designation is broad and clients bring an array of assumptions to their expectations for it. Among conservative Christians, one's stance on sexuality has become a sort of litmus test. So by stating my work in this field, I provided some insight into the type of Christian I am. That's why I found it important to include that. The most important insight gleaned from reflection upon the school's opposition to me was their conflation of all forms of therapy for unwanted same-sex attraction that were not gay-affirmative. This point is critical for sexual identity therapists to comprehend. When the APA's Task Force on Appropriate Therapeutic Responses to Sexual Orientation report was released, Mark Yarhouse and Warren Throckmorton wrote with elation that their sexual identity therapy framework was affirmed all throughout the paper, particularly parts that advised against encouraging the coming out process for individuals in certain circumstances. However, I am convinced that my story demonstrates how Yarhouse and Throckmorton's confidence that their approach would be politically safe was premature. In my meeting with Dr. Wood and Dr. Sachs, I explained the different approaches for unwanted SSA, and then clarified that though I may agree with the developmental model underlying reparative therapy, my praxis was in line with sexual identity therapy. Changing sexual attraction or sexual orientation was never a stated goal in my group work or individual work. Instead, just as I worded in my biography, I assisted clients in coping with unwanted attractions and with their choices to leave homosexual lifestyles, patterns of sexual behaviors and relationships. Yes, I understand there's no gay lifestyle. There are multiple types of homosexual lifestyles as a sexual lifestyle. Just as with the tenets of sexual identity therapy, I explained in my meeting that my role was to help Christian clients live congruently with their faith, which includes its values, goals, and sexual ethics. What soon became quite evident was that none of these distinctions mattered to the school. The goals of my clients were in contradiction to their own ideology, and therefore they deemed our work unethical and harmful. If there is any existing enmity between change-oriented therapists, reparative therapists and others, or reintegrative therapists now at this point and others, and sexual identity therapists, my case should serve as a call to unite in realization that we all face the same existential threat. Just focusing on the behavior isn't enough because all the bans for so-called conversion therapy include any change of behavior as constituting so-called conversion therapy. They don't make an exception if you're just doing sexual identity therapy. Chestnut Hill's final rationale for opposing me was their belief that I would be a future danger to the field of psychology, and so they had a moral obligation to thwart my career, especially when I declared that I would be open to civil disobedience if a client's right to self-determination was threatened. The irony is manifold, because the psychology establishment is making judgments outside of its jurisdiction. In my meeting, Dr. Sachs and Dr. Wood informed me that science has already proven that homosexuality is a good and normal expression of sexuality. I had to remind them that such a claim is a philosophical and moral assertion, not a scientific one. That's not something that science is able to make. Nevertheless, without indisputable proof that reparative therapy or SIT are harmful,
they are on a crusade to protect clients by trampling on their rights. So here we are 10 years later, looking back. What's the outcome? Well, the final irony of it all is that their efforts to impede me from entering this field only serve to propel me more into it. Through my correspondence with Dr. Davidson, whom I met at the Restored Hope Network conference the day after the email starting this whole thing, I got connected with Dr. Rosick, a past president of the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice. And then I came into contact with multiple other members of the Alliance, such as David Pickup. And then I got a phone call from the Dr. Joseph Nicolosi Sr. And that was like meeting one of your heroes. For me, having a phone call with him, and then he offered to award me with the Nicolosi Award for Student Excellence, the 2015 award for that. And the Alliance chose to fly me down the following year to their conference in Dallas, and I shared my story there. And the rest is history in a lot of ways, because once I went to that conference, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to keep going to these conferences. And especially since they started their safety certification program at that particular year, sexual attraction fluidity exploration in therapy certification. So if you went to Alliance conferences, you can get credits as you go to different breakout sessions and keynote addresses toward having certification in safety, sexual attraction fluidity exploration in therapy. And so I've been going to Alliance conferences ever since, and as of last year, 2024, I'm a board member of the Alliance. And then I got connected with Joseph Nicolosi Sr., and I started working with him in his research team. He would send me journal articles for a major project he was working on, a critical evaluation of the evidence, or a critical review of the evidence regarding sexual orientation and change efforts, all this stuff. So kind of combating the narrative of the APA. So he would send me journal articles, and I would do summaries of them along with a team of other people. And so I got to work under him in that effort up until he passed away in March 2017. And then in 2020, I did my training with Joe Nicolosi Jr. in reintegrative therapy. After Joe Sr. passed away, Joe Jr. took the name Reparative Therapy, and because it's been so misused and maligned over the years, he retired it, and he introduced reintegrative therapy, which has some differences with his father's approach. Not too many, but enough to make it so that, no, this is not specifically for dealing with homosexuality. This is for any sort of sexual arousal template or unwanted compulsive behavior. And so we use certain mindfulness-based and trauma-based techniques to resolve those sort of arousal templates and unwanted behavior and fantasies. So I started my training in that in 2020. I'm now certified in reintegrative therapy, and now I am I'm the training facilitator for reintegrative therapy. So I'm at the point where I teach it to others, and so I do our trainings. So I would love to train people. I love teaching this stuff. I'm building up as many other therapists as I can, because there's such a demand. People reach out to me all the time because of my videos, and I'm trying to find more therapists for them across the country and across the world. I'm now an affiliate counselor of Restored Hope Network. Another thing that happened was Seven Ministries, where I did my undergraduate internship when I was working on my bachelor's. They opened up a location that was closer to where I live, because their main office is in Lancaster, and then after college, I moved out closer to the Philadelphia area, or the greater Philly area, and so they were quite a distance from me, but I always wanted to go back to my internship site. Well, they opened up my office that's about 40 minutes away from where I was living, and so I started working there. So I got to work at the very place where I had gotten my whole start in this field. And I worked there up until 2021, 2022, something like that, when I then opened up my own practice right here in Pottstown, PA. Just one thing has led to another, to the point now where I was one of the keynote speakers at the Restored Hope Network's conference that just ended last week. So I'm so grateful for all the opportunities that God brought out of this persecution. It led to me getting more connected with people, meeting so many others who are battle buddies in this field. So the joke's on you, Chestnut Hill, for trying to stop what God had planned. So 10 years later, I can look back at the experience. Sometimes I get a little fired up, but for the most part, I'm really grateful. And the persecution, the discrimination I experienced is a badge of honor. And the other thing, too, is it's just made me bolder because I've already been canceled. What are you going to do? Try to cancel me again? I've had to endure more attacks. People try to get me fired from my old job because of what I post, and they tried talking to my boss to try to get him to fire me, but he had my back. People have tried to attack my license. That might still happen. I'm not unaware of the possibility that people might still try to get me and get my license. It would be wrong if they tried to, but hey, I'm not worried about it. God will always provide. And God has called me to this. So until he calls me to do something else, this is what I'm doing. And I'm just trying to help as many people as I can before I can't do the work at all. So, that's my whole story. I know there's quite a bit more I could say, but this video has gone on long enough, so let's call it a wrap. And I always want to make sure I end with this. Please know that Jesus loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully. Take care.